Hi, and welcome to this presentation on Danish education forming democratic citizens. My name is Anders Schulz, and it's a pleasure and an honor for me to be with you today. An honor that you will be viewing this presentation and that you will be participating in the Q&A afterwards with myself and Andrea. Before starting the presentation, just a few words about myself. My name, as I said, is Anders Schulz, and I am the head of the Global Citizenship Program at ՌcenStin Gymnasium in Copenhagen, Denmark. A job which entails working with school leaders and teachers and scholars all around the world, in countries as different as Argentina, the US, Uganda, and of course Korea. It has been a pleasure for me to visit the great country of Korea many times, and I've given presentations, I believe, 40 or 50 times to Korean audiences. I'm also the editor and co-author of Global Citizenship Education in Praxis, a book published by Multilingual Matters and created in collaboration with Professor Michael Byram. I have written numerous articles about global citizenship and the Danish approach to teaching and democratic citizenship. I am also the member of the International Advisory Board at Chongju National University of Education. And then I'm a former teacher of history and physical education. And I am also the CEO of Nordic Teaching, a company which seeks to promote the best aspects of the Danish approach to teaching to countries all around the world, not least the way we teach democratic citizenship. Now, this presentation will be on the connection between Danish education and the democratic state, or rather democratic citizens. I have been very inspired by recent events in Korea. I know that many of you were very anxious and probably still are following the events of the 4th of December. The president tried to impose martial law on Korea and Korean democracy, and I know that there was a feeling of him almost bringing Korean democracy to the brink of destruction. Now, seen from the outside, at least, your democracy was saved by brave citizens, politicians, journalists who took to the streets and demonstrated the horrendous of president. So if this can in any way console you, then maybe these events will one day show to be not the story of the darkest hour of Korean democracy, but maybe the brightest day, because maybe this will be the story of how you, the people, and the culture of democracy in Korea saved Korean democracy. In Denmark, we have the story of 1920, where the king tried to take over the very young Danish democracy at the time. At the time, this was seen as a horrible moment, of course, in the history of Danish democracy. But today, this story is being told as the story of the strength of the democratic institutions, and not least the democratic mindset of the Danish people. And it is my hope, and I'm crossing my fingers for you, that you will one day in the future look back upon this story, these events, in the same light as we are now looking back at the events of 1920. But of course, when something like this happens, and the president tries to impose martial law when it was not legitimate at all, then many people will pose themselves the question, how did we actually get to this? Now, I'm no expert on Korea, and I have no idea about that. But I've been talking to my good friend, Seong-Ju Lee, and also reading his beautifully written article about the connection between Korean education, or at least one aspect of Korean education, and then the actions and the mindset and the emergence of the president. And what Seong-Ju Lee suggests is that maybe the extreme competitiveness of the Korean education system was partly to blame for the emergence of the ex-president and also for his way of thinking. Because what Mr. Lee suggests is that the extreme competitiveness may have resulted in creating a certain kind of individual with very low self-esteem, but a high level of confidence, because there was always this focus on performance, never just on who you are, on appreciating who you are in the educational system. Also, he suggests that there is also an extreme degree of in-group, out-group thinking, meaning that empathy, which will expand beyond the people very closest to you, is also lacking to a certain degree. And lastly, also the idea that formal democratic education in Korea is, at least by some people, has not been adopted profoundly enough. Now, I don't know if this is true. It's a beautifully written article, and it is really food for thought, rather. But what I will do in this presentation is that I will be looking at these elements of self-esteem, of in-group, out-group thinking, empathy, inclusion, and formal democratic education, and try to explain why we in Denmark, why we prioritize these factors so much. And then after that, also, I will look at how politicians, teachers, and school leaders, they try to further these values, how to work with these values in practice in the Danish schools. And lastly, I will be looking at, I'll be reflecting on the strengths and weaknesses of the Danish education system, because certainly the Danish education system is by no means perfect. And in many ways, the Korean system is much better than the Danish system. But I do believe that we have some strengths when it comes to building a democratic mindset. And so what I will be reflecting on here is actually, if the weaknesses that we have, are they the product of the strengths? Or can we get rid of the weaknesses and still keep our strength? And if that is the case, which I indeed believe it is, then that will be an inspiration, maybe also for other countries. So when we look at the historical background and try to explain why we think like we do in Denmark about democracy, self-esteem, and so forth, we have to remember that it was not always like that. When the first school law was, when we had the first school law back in 1814, this school law had a very different approach to how students should think and how we should try to facilitate their mindset. The idea here was that that you were basically meant to be educated for the sake of the monarchy. At that time, Denmark was not a democracy. You were educated to be a good servant of the monarchy and of the elite. So in the rural areas, peasants were only meant to learn the most basic things. And in the purpose clause of the law, it only stated that it was for the purpose of the country, not for personal development, not for taking part in any kind of democratic debate. But then later on in the 1800s, an extremely important and also, at least in Denmark, very famous preacher emerged on the scene of public debate. His name was Grundtvig. And his idea was that education, first of all, was not supposed to be only for the few. It was supposed to be for everyone. And education was also supposed to form democratic-minded people who were able and willing to take part in the public debate, and who were also able, of course, to do their part in lifting the economic challenges of the country, but also taking part in the development of a civic society and a civil society. So his way of thinking about education was to emphasize freedom and freedom of the mind, creativity. That was important to bring to students, and for the students, that was important for them to bring with them to the rest of their lives, for the sake of themselves, but also for the sake of society as a whole. Now, these ideas never really found their way into the public system at the time, but they did find their way into the højskole system of Denmark, or højskole movement, which some of you may have heard of, because you also have one or two højskoler in Korea at the moment. But the idea here was that a højskole was a place you could attend, a school you could attend after finishing normal obligatory school, and where the teaching was for the sake of your own personal development, and not only for the sake of being an efficient servant of the state. Of course, some teachers were inspired by this in the public system, but those thoughts didn't really find its way into purpose clauses or curricula in the public system. However, the ideas of Grundtvig survived, and as history unfolded in Denmark, they became more and more important to the developments in the public school system. In the 1930s, things really started to change in the public system as well, because at that time Denmark had become a democracy by the mid 1800s, and had now been a democracy for 80 years, of course facing the challenge, as I mentioned before, of 1920, but was more or less solidified, to a certain degree at least, solidified democracy at the time. And the prime minister, the social democratic prime minister, who faced strong challenges from the outside, not least from Nazi Germany in the 1930s, had the idea that if Denmark could not protect its borders from the outside, then we needed to protect our democracy from the inside, meaning that we had to build a democratic mindset with our citizens. And those ideas were challenged into the education system, bringing some of the ideas of Grundtvig as well. So that in 1937, we saw a purpose clause which was much more democratic minded and was focused very much on the formation of a strong democracy from within. Then after the Second World War, we really had, I wouldn't say the finished idea, because an idea of democracy will never be finished. It has to be alive. But the idea that is most common now in Danish primary schools, secondary schools, højskoler, really in the whole of our society. An idea which was formulated by the minister Hal Koch, who wrote the book What is Democracy? Hvad er demokrati in Danish? And proposing the idea that democracy is not just a system, it is a culture. And it is a culture that has to be reborn with every generation. Because he says, if people are not brought up with democratic values, if they do not believe in them, if they haven't practiced them, then at some point they will start doubting the institutions. And then it's just a matter of time before the institutions will falter. So his idea was that you had to ingrain a democratic culture into everything you're doing, especially, of course, in your schools. And here you can see really the emergence of a coherent pattern of working with self-esteem, working with empathy, working with the idea of having respect not only for the ones that you are close to and who have the same ideas as you, but also for people whom you do not agree with. And of course, also linking that to the formal democratic education, of formal democratic citizenship education. And of course, just to finish off, why self-esteem has been so prioritized in Danish schools, preschools, kindergartens, and so on. It is also because we believe that students with high self-esteem are also good learners. And why is that? That is because a person who believes in him or herself is much more capable of adopting knowledge and of remembering this knowledge. If you're always anxious, if you are always thinking about the results, then actually you block to a certain level your ability for acquiring new knowledge. And this is not me just believing this. This is also formulated by some of the best cognitive psychologists in the world. So if you look at how self-esteem is being worked with in kindergartens and preschools, because this is actually where it starts. It starts from when children are very, very young. The way that they work with this in the kindergartens and the preschools is that they always try to show an interest in the children for the human beings that they are, not for the performances that they do. And this is supported by the politicians who have written purpose clause and by the strategies that all kindergartens and preschools they need to have by law. All of them emphasize the importance of self-esteem. And now this focus on appreciating and seeing the students as they are, and not only looking at their performances and praising them for performances, also means that in the Danish system, grades are not given before children turn 13 or 14, sorry. Now, self-esteem is also built via feedback strategies. And that goes for strategies in the kindergartens, preschools, but also later on in secondary schools and even at university level. We try to do the feedback, or teachers try always to keep their feedback in a positive language. They try to focus on where you can go next. What will be the realistic next step for you? Instead of just saying to maybe the weaker students, basically everything that you've done is wrong. In this essay, you can see that it's all red because I've used my red marker to underline all your mistakes. And this is what you can see. I only see mistakes. I see a very weak student. Then instead of that, you look at the student saying, this is where you are now. Of course, you could be, you hope that you were on a different level, but this is where you are now, and let's focus on where you can go next. Then it's also very important that the teachers always strive not to show the students that the academic assessment that they do of the students will influence the view of the students as human beings. So they appreciate them just as much as they did before they were assessed, maybe in a negative way or as not as the strongest student. That will not affect the way the teachers look at the students. And then we try never to compare students with each other. So you will never see a list of students in a class or cohort where you can see which students did the best and then the one who did the second best and so on. That will never happen. That is kind of like a no-go. And I think if you did it as a school, you would probably see a complaint to the ministry, and that would be a very serious thing to do and perceived as very unpedagogical. Now, looking at how we work with empathy and inclusiveness, remembering that Mr. Lee suggested that maybe in the Korean system, one of the mistakes that have been done in the Korean system is that you have this extreme way of seeing in groups and out groups, meaning that you may be very empathetic to the people that are close to you, but you cannot really empathize with people whom you do not agree with and are not immediately close to you. Meaning that if you're in power as president, then you had sympathy for all the people that agreed with you, with your family, but the ones you didn't agree with, you had no real respect or empathy for them. I think a very important way we try to work with this empathy, respect, call it what you like, for people who you do not agree with, is that we always try to see the cohort of students or the class of students as a team. Illustrated here by the rowers, they are on the same team. So they are told that you work together as a sports team. And the best, if you're going to do magnificent things as students, you need to be working together. You depend on each other instead of saying that you're in extreme competition with each other. I know that Andrea will also be touching upon these features in her presentation. And I think this way of letting students work or perceiving the class as a team is a way for them to be much more including and to build respect and even empathy for the people whom you do not agree with. Because, of course, within a cohort of 28 students, there will be people whom you do not agree with, but you still think, I need to listen to them. I have to listen to them because this is important for me to grow as a human being, and this is important for me to get the best academic results. And often we will also just be working together in a group. So I will be working with people whom I do not agree with, but I still have to find a way to work with them. Now, diving further into this theme of empathy and inclusiveness, then it's also very important to stress that the class is not only seen as a team. Much of the teaching that we do, most I would say, is dialogue based, which means that you are simply forced to listen to other people, and you're also forced to speak your own mind. And of course, if this has to work, then it has to be done in a respectful manner. And not only is the dialogue or the teaching dialogue based, we have dialogue based oral exams, and actually many of them, where you engage in a dialogue with your teacher. And so much of what you're actually assessed upon will be how well you interact with the teacher, how well are you at engaging in this dialogue with your teacher. Of course, there will be questions from the teacher, but these questions are often formulated in a way where you really have to listen very well, because they are not all only questions about concrete things. They are much more focused on analyzing different themes, whatever they may be. And so the students learn to respectfully disagree, and they also learn how to build on each other's idea. All of that forming the idea that I am depending on my fellow students and later on in life on my fellow citizens. And then when it comes to the teaching of democratic values or democratic practices, now this can be done in many ways. I've heard from at conferences from other countries that you kind of have lessons on democratic institutions, and you tell the students that democracy in theory has to work like this. You hold an election and you have certain freedoms and so on and so forth. Of course, we do that in Denmark. But I don't think that there's any guarantee that you will adopt democratic values by doing that. The way, I think, what is much more important in Denmark is the way that we try to teach our students of democratic values by working with them in praxis. Meaning, for example, that the student council, which we have at all Danish schools, they have a voice with the board of directors at the school by law. So the students learn that their voices will actually be heard by the management of the school, by the teachers at the school, but also by the board of directors. They also learn this through just playing from a very early age democracy. We have games with them. When they're very young, they vote on different things which are suitable for their age. Could be like voting on if they should have an apple or banana in the lunch pack every day at school. But just so that they learn to respect there's a majority, but you also have to listen to the minority. And then it's the way you can see the photo on the left, upper left, the way the teachers engage with the students, the way they listen to them. So instead of just being the all-knowing authority and always just telling them this is right, this is wrong, they listen to them, they appreciate their opinions. And by appreciating that, the students learn that people in authority will listen to them because they are important, which is an extremely important way to think once you are an adult and a democratic citizen. Now, lastly, I will be reflecting on the strengths and the weaknesses of the Danish educational system. Now, I have emphasized some of the strengths when it comes to forming democratic-minded citizens, and I do really believe that they are strengths, because I do believe that the Danish system has something to give to other systems all around the world. But definitely there are also weaknesses in the Danish system. And some of these weaknesses are connected to the meager results that we have seen in international tests, such as the PISA tests. For example, Danish students are not doing as well as we would have hoped them to do in science tests, in math tests, and so on. And what seems to be missing or lacking from the knowledge and the capabilities of Danish students are often the most basic skills. That some of them seem to be thinking that I don't need these basic skills. I just need to be able to analyze and engage in meaningful dialogues. And in that way, you can say that in a certain way, it is connected to the strengths, because some of the strengths that we do have, that we emphasize analysis, that we emphasize human development, or development of the human mind as a very broad way of thinking, that for some students means that they tend not to work as hard as we would like them to do. The thing is, for me, that actually comes down to a misunderstanding from these students. The idea that because you are focusing in a system on your capabilities for analyzing, that you don't have to acquire the basic skills of spelling and doing math and so on is of course wrong, because these are the very foundations on which you will build and establish your analysis of whatever that may be later on. And I don't think we have been good enough in Denmark at promoting that, at telling our students, listen, what we strive for is, of course, that you are capable of doing analytical thinking, that creative thinking, critical thinking, and also that you develop as a democratic citizen. But before you can do any of this, before you can do critical thinking, creative thinking, and before you can be a strong or in any meaningful way democratic citizen, you need to acquire these basic skills. And so I think we have let some of our students down, especially the weaker students, because they tend to think, they tend to understand the system as, if I just present my own opinion about almost everything, then that is good enough. Then I will have a good grade and I will develop as a democratic citizen. But of course, it's not like that. Your opinions, their opinions are appreciated, but they also have to learn that they have to be on a qualified foundation. And the best and the strongest students, they understand that. And they develop a very strong democratic mindset and become very strong democratic citizens. And at the same time, they also develop skills which are extremely important in the 21st century, the work market in the 21st century. But of course, some of the weaker students, they seem to be missing out, and maybe of this development, and maybe it would be better for them if there was a stronger focus on learning basic skills and rote learning and so on. But just to finish off, if we look at the 21st century skills definition by PISA, look at learning in the digital world, creative thinking, global competence, collaborative problem solving, creative problem solving, then I believe that there's no real there's no reason why the promotion of democratic citizenship through working with self-esteem, through working with inclusiveness, group work, respect for the other, and working with Republican thinking and democratic education as a formal part of your education, why that should not be able also to work smoothly with promotion and promoting these skills. So I would say that if you can take the best parts from the Danish system, focusing on these skills and traits that we've just gone through via the presentation, and then probably emphasizing more, or not just probably, I believe you should certainly emphasizing the importance of basic skills even more, then you could probably create a system which would be, or you could create a system which would be extremely suited for not just democratic citizenship, but also from the work market of the 21st century. In some ways, you could say that it would be a blend between the Korean approach to teaching and the Danish approach to teaching. Thank you very much.